U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner came to the Russian capital on Tuesday in an attempt to reach a consensus in peace negotiations over Ukraine. And to talk about it, we're joined by Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So what do you make of the sheer composition of the American delegation to Moscow? Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are trying to broker a peace deal for Ukraine.
Well, you have two businessmen, two real estate developers, talking to a war criminal. And then, excuse me, there's also a Russian businessman there, Dmitriev. So it's 3 against 1. And as I think your leader, Tusk, said, this is about business, not about a peace deal.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about business, why is Washington so reluctant to inform Europe on peace talks progress? Because, for example, Marco Rubio will not attend tomorrow's meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Europe.
Well, I think the problem is that the two sides are absolutely in disagreement about 3 things. First of all, the surrender of some territory that Russia hasn't conquered in Ukraine as a settlement, the capping of the size of its military, and the fact that it can't be part of NATO or NATO can't help it. There's no security guarantees in here for Ukraine either, which is an absolute necessity. And so, if you can't find a middle ground between those 4 issues, there's not going to be a deal. In fact, there can't be a deal unless someone is convinced by other reasons, and that could have to do with money or deals or whatever. But this is supposed to be a peace deal.
In this context, what is the significance of the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Moscow just hours before the American delegation's arrival? Was it a deliberate, a warning gesture, or is China trying to convince maybe Vladimir Putin to agree to American demands?
I would love if that were the case, but in fact, it's more like Putin. He summoned Orban to come for a little summit so he could badmouth Ukraine and praise Putin. This is going to be the same kind of thing, although I don't think the Chinese will badmouth Ukraine. Their position has been, the war should end amicably, which is quite impossible. No, I think they're there to plump up the stature of Putin, whose economy is starting to crater and his army is not very good because it's not getting very far very fast.
Mm-hmm. Now, we know that Russia's economy is in quite a bad shape, but Russia, on the other hand, tries to portray the situation on frontlines as a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe of Ukraine's soldiers, and it claims that it has conquered the city of Pokrovsk. Now, have Russian negotiators already convinced Washington that Ukraine's defeat is imminent?
Well, that's been their take on it all along. You can't win, so why don't you just give up what we want right now, and then it all goes away. But without security guarantees, and because you're dealing with a maniacal regime like Putin's, you can't trust that they're not going to invade again. And also, I've been looking at the research, the Pokrovsk boast by Russia that they've taken the city, and that this is some kind of an example of the front line falling apart from the Ukrainian point of view, doesn't seem to be true. First of all, it isn't falling apart because Pokrovsk has lost its usefulness to supply chains for the military months ago when they started battering it. But Russian military bloggers, those that have credibility, say that it's not true, that they haven't, taken over Pokrovsk. They've taken over some of the ruins in Pokrovsk, but it's propaganda designed to undermine Ukraine's argument and Europe's argument that this war has to stop. I mean, it has to come to a halt now.
About undermining Europe's position. We have a little quote from Vladimir Putin. They are on the side of war, and if Europe suddenly wants to fight us and starts the war, we are ready right now. Are Putin's efforts to portray Europeans as warmongers successful across the Atlantic Ocean? Could he succeed in driving a strong wedge between the NATO allies?
No, not at all. In fact, the Americans don't think they're strong enough militarily, and neither do most European leaders, led by, of course, Poland, which is strong. But Germany now has come up with a war plan. It's taking this very seriously. The British always did, and the Baltics and the frontline countries always did. No, I think part of the reason for that message was, as you say, maybe wedge, an attempt to wedge the alliance between the two. But I think it's really it's a scaremongering tactic. It's, oh, you think we're not going to go at war? You think you can go at war against us? We're already ready, and you're not. And that's what he's saying. And so that's another reason to unsettle the side of those of us who are with Ukraine into thinking Russia is just so strong and never will stop. And you better give it what it wants, whatever it wants, or else, this continues.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ukraine is attacking the Russian shadow fleet, as we've informed in our previous report. Now, is this the sort of economic pressure combined with inland attacks on Russia's energy sites weakening the Kremlin's position in peace negotiations enough to make Vladimir Putin reconsider his position on Ukraine?
Well, I think there's about 100 oil tankers that have to sink before he'd capitulate. I think you have to dry up the entire supply chain of his energy. And one of the things I might say is that, and I've just written it, is that, when you blow up an oil tanker, you create environmental problems and sometimes problems for a peaceful country who's sure that it's been blown up beside. I think a far better strategy is for the European Union to just simply impound every shadow fleet vessel that goes up and down its waterways, and they all do. Just impound them. Just make them go in port and stay there and not deliver. That doesn't necessitate bombs and environmental oil spills, but I think that's something that Europe should be doing now.
But wouldn't that be totally in accordance with international law? Because you first have to prove that these vessels actually belong to Russia.
Well, you can make them stay in port, and you can have the paperwork take months while you try and get to the bottom of the ownership. I mean, come on. We can't be the Boy Scouts and they're the devil. I mean, he has blown through every international law, every human rights violation, every war crime. He doesn't care. He's not going to care about that. Meanwhile, on the Western side, people are concerned about, will they sue us if we give the frozen Russian assets to Ukraine as reparations? Well, that shouldn't even be a case. Just take it. That's it. Be ruthless. There has to be, we have to get tougher because this guy is playing us. He's playing through all the loopholes he can.
And now, according to unofficial NATO diplomatic sources, the Polish city of Bydgoszcz will serve as the main logistics hub for the coalition of the willing forces to be deployed in Ukraine. I'm talking about the coalition of the willing forces. Although Warsaw will not be sending its own peacekeepers there. So is this enough, in your opinion, to place Poland as one of the European leaders in supporting Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we don't know whether there'll be a coalition of the willing boots on the ground from any European country allowed inside Ukraine, because that seems to be one of the sticking points with Putin. He doesn't want any of them there. And the French and British have said they were happy to do that. And that's probably why Poland doesn't have to add to the mix at this point, because the British and the French have more or less committed to that. And having it, of course, having a station in Poland is is essential. You're on the front line. And you have all of the military capability and logistical knowledge and supply chain necessary for that. But I think that we're coming to a point. We're going to find out in the next 24 hours or so whether the Ukrainian American alternate plan is going to go anywhere with Russia. And I'm pretty pessimistic, but let's hope I'm wrong.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching and stay with us for more news and interviews here on TVP World.